because of the fiscal irresponsibility of this administration. The World Bank has cut our growth estimates in half, and the bond markets are screaming at us to stop. We now pay, and we are paying this year, more in interest than we are in the national defense. Secretary Bessent, how can you square your concern with fiscal health with deficit finance growth for families that need those tax cuts least?
We did not get here. We inherited this fiscal situation that I believe.
Well, you inherited from Donald Trump, who was here. You did, Mr. Bessent.
No,
yes,
sir.
you did, Mr.
No,
Bessent.
sir.
You inherited from Donald Trump. He's the first president to come back after a 4-year hiatus, after we know exactly what the last tax cuts did, which was blow a massive hole.
Michael Bennet doesn't hold back as he confronts Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent over a $2.4 trillion plan that cuts healthcare, nutrition assistance, and clean energy programs while giving massive tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans. Interest rates are soaring, credit ratings are falling, and the American people are paying the price. Bennet forces the truth into the light, and the numbers don't lie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming in today, and thanks for having this hearing. Secretary Bessent, the last time you were here, I asked you about your emphasis on domestic discretionary funding in your opening statement. You had stated, quote, "We must adjust federal domestic discretionary spending to get our fiscal house in order while striking an urgent tone on our growing deficit." I mentioned to you then that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of our budget. And I think if you were serious about deficit reduction, you might not push for tax cuts that almost certainly could not be offset by discretionary adjustments alone. And now, of course, we know you can't. Today, we actually have the details of your plan. Take health care from 10 million Americans, 126,000 Coloradans. Cut nutrition assistance for millions of adults. Sunset clean energy investments that are so critical to the American West. Give over 40% of the tax benefits of this bill to the top 5%. And it's not even close to being paid for. Even my colleagues on the Republican side, who for years and years and years have claimed to be the fiscally responsible party, now are admitting that it's not paid for. This bill adds another $2.4 trillion to our national debt. It will push the deficit to GDP ratio up to 7%, which you said when you were here before was unsustainable, far from the 3% target that you described. If you look at your proposals taken together, there is no getting around the fact. There is no getting around the fact that the richest Americans receive an average tax cut of $300,000, which again, we're not paying for with the discretionary cuts that you advertise. So once again, we will have to borrow money in order to assist the people in this country who least need a tax cut at this moment, while the Americans who have been made miserable by the economy that they're in actually see income reduced because of cuts to Medicaid and cuts to SNAP. Meanwhile, and I think, Mr. Chairman, this is really important, meanwhile, interest rates are at 20-year highs. Moody's has slashed our credit rating because of the fiscal irresponsibility of this administration. The World Bank has cut our growth estimates in half, and the bond markets are screaming at us to stop. We now pay, and we are paying this year, more in interest than we are in the national defense. Secretary Bessent, how can you square your concern with fiscal health with deficit finance growth for families that need those tax cuts least?
We did not get here. We inherited this fiscal situation that I believe.
Well, you inherited from Donald Trump, who was here. You did, Mr. Bessent.
No,
yes,
sir.
you did, Mr.
No,
Bessent.
sir.
You inherited from Donald Trump. He's the first president to come back after a 4-year hiatus, after we know exactly what the last tax cuts did, which was blow a massive hole in our deficit and debt. You can't sit here and lie about that. It's true. The data, to coin a phrase, the data shows that that's the result. The math shows that that is the result. No one on this side of the aisle admits anymore that, or claims anymore that they didn't blow a huge hole in the deficit. They did. And now you're here saying to the American people, let's double down on that. We're going to give tax cuts for the wealthy. We are going to give tax cuts again to the wealthiest people in America, and we are going to finance it on the backs of the sons and daughters of teachers and firefighters and police officers all over this country, because we can't pay for it. Because the Treasury Secretary discovered somehow that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of the budget, and therefore you can't balance it there.
Well, sir, we had a referendum on November 5th.
You certainly
your
did. I agree with
policies. Your side lost.
I agree with that.
And a higher decibel level.
And I'm a rare Democrat who doesn't blame Donald Trump for winning. I'm sad he won. I don't blame him for winning. But don't come here.
In your statements,
go ahead.
They have veracity.
Go ahead, Mr. Secretary. What?
Higher decibel level does not give your statements more veracity.
My statements are true, if that's the word, if that's what you mean by veracity. My statements are true. You blew a massive hole in the deficit when your predecessor was sitting here under Donald Trump. And so the question is, can't we think of something better to do with the money than this debt, than drive up interest rates by borrowing money from our kids so the richest people in America can get a tax cut when they don't need it? That is the reality of your plan.
Well, sir, actually the high interest rates were achieved during the Biden administration in October of 2023, and we have not touched those rates since then. So
the high interest rates.
So your statement's incorrect.
I'm out of time, and I appreciate the indulgence of the chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
What makes this exchange so striking isn't the heat of the moment or the sharp words Bennet uses. It's the way he peels back the numbers and exposes a pattern of policy that has profound consequences for millions of Americans. Bennet begins with the foundation. Domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of the federal budget. That means any claim that cutting discretionary programs alone can finance sweeping tax cuts is mathematically impossible. Yet Bessent and the administration present these cuts as responsible fiscal policy. Bennet refuses to let the audience accept that framing. He walks the public through the human cost. Healthcare could be taken from 10 million Americans, including 126,000 Coloradans. Nutrition assistance for millions of adults could disappear. Critical clean energy investments that sustain communities across the American West are at risk. Meanwhile, the top 5% of Americans receive over 40% of the benefits of this plan, a glaring imbalance. The cuts don't just fail to fund the plan, they shift the burden onto families who can least afford it, while the wealthy are enriched. This is fiscal policy with real consequences, and Bennet ensures the public sees it clearly. Bennet doesn't stop at arithmetic. He contextualizes the plan within a decades-long pattern. The deficit situation he is addressing wasn't invented overnight. It was inherited from the previous administration under Donald Trump, whose tax cuts created a massive hole in the budget. When Bessent attempts to deflect responsibility, Bennet cuts through the rhetoric. The data shows who caused the deficit, and now this plan doubles down on that approach. Credit is claimed when convenient, blame is shifted when the public feels the impact. Bennet exposes that contradiction with clarity and evidence. He also highlights the systemic implications of borrowing to fund tax cuts for the wealthy. Interest rates are at 20-year highs. Moody's has downgraded the nation's credit rating. The World Bank has slashed growth estimates. Bond markets are signaling alarm. Americans are paying more in interest this year than on national defense. Bennet frames this not as abstract numbers on a spreadsheet, but as real costs that affect families, workers, and the economic stability of the country. These aren't statistics. They are a story of cause and consequence. What emerges from this exchange is a lesson in accountability. Bennet's questions illuminate the misalignment between rhetoric and reality, between promises and outcomes. He reminds Americans that fiscal responsibility cannot be selective, it must be comprehensive, transparent, and just. When policy enriches the few at the expense of the many, it erodes trust and undermines the social contract. Bennett's insistence on clarity, his refusal to accept evasive answers, and his commitment to truth exemplify how oversight should function in a democracy. By forcing this conversation into the open, Bennet not only scrutinizes the Treasury Secretary's plan, but educates the public on the mechanics of fiscal policy, the consequences of deficit financing, and the importance of equitable governance. He humanizes the numbers, showing that economic policy is not abstract. It touches health, nutrition, clean energy, interest rates, and ultimately the daily lives of Americans. This is what accountability looks like in practice: rigorous, evidence-based, and unapologetically focused on the public good. The wealthiest Americans get tax cuts, while the public pays the price. Should Congress prioritize fairness over partisan giveaways, or is this the new normal? Comment below with your thoughts. The public deserves this debate.